Thanks for listening in. You're tuned to Agriculture Today. Up first, our cattle market segment for the week. And we've caught up once again with Derrell Peel. He's a livestock economist out of Oklahoma State University. Derrell, we've a grab bag of things we want to pick up on this week. Actually, though, when we review last week's trade, not a whole lot of exciting things going on there, but the general drift of it seems to be that these markets continue to recover a bit from the earlier lows.
That's exactly right. You know, these markets have been pretty resilient. What looked like was kind of a seasonal peak in many of these markets. Now we've actually recovered from, kind of a correction here a few weeks ago. And so we've seen, some strength in box beef markets and fed cattle markets, and the feeder cattle markets all have shown quite a bit of resiliency. And this is in the face of the reality and the expectation that as we go through May and into June that we're going to see seasonal increases in slaughter numbers and in beef production that will certainly be a challenge for the market.
So it really is demand that's pulling these markets and keeping them afloat.
It is. Domestic demand continues to look very strong. We just got new trade numbers, and the trade data confirms that beef exports continue to support these markets. And so, again, we've got a situation where there's a certain expectation of supply pressure. Most notably, if you look at the live cattle futures contracts, we've got a huge discount on June relative to current cash markets, and that will have to close over the next few weeks. And the question is, will the cash come down closer to where futures are, or will the futures come up to a stronger than expected cash market? And that really hinges on demand.
Well, let's talk a bit in more detail about boxed beef demand, which did well again last week. And you've been looking at individual cuts and noting that there are seemingly clear indications that the grilling season is off and running.
That's right. If you look at, a breakdown of some of the wholesale cuts, choice cuts in particular, we've seen a nice recovery from some earlier weakness in some of the middle meats, ribeyes and tenderloins, all kind of bouncing back here in the last few weeks. And this is the time of year when we sort of expect that. So I really do think we had a cooler than normal April. That probably delayed the grilling season a little bit. But as we get into May here and get a little more seasonal kind of weather, it looks like we've got some strength maintaining in these markets. And
you mentioned the new export trade data. What caught your eye, if anything, there, Derrell?
Well, I guess the continuation of what we've been seeing in the month of March, which is the latest data that we have, beef exports from the U.S. were up 11.4%. Up to most of our major markets, although on North American markets, both Canada and Mexico were down on a monthly basis, but continuing strong to South Korea in particular, to Hong Kong, and to Taiwan. Japan was a little more modest, just a slight increase, less than 2% for the month of March.
Again, we continue to come back to this worry about our trade situation with various countries, China most notably. But in the main, the beef trade has held up quite well despite all of these uncertainties.
It has. I mean, the actual numbers, it's in my mind, it's kind of a case of so far so good. There's certainly some uncertainty going forward, some potential for disruption in these markets. But as long as we don't see that, we continue to see underneath that all, there's, certainly a market basis here for some very strong demand in the global market, and we continue to enjoy that for the time being at least.
Well, Derrell, we want to spend some time on an issue that continues to be of concern, very much so in Kansas, in your state of Oklahoma as well. Despite some recent rainfall, which was welcome and beneficial, we remain in drought in the better part of both of those states and elsewhere. One continues to wonder just what kind of influence this is going to have on cattle movement, cattle numbers, and you've worked up some information toward that end.
In terms of the broader drought, I think we're at the critical time now. I mean, up until now, when you look at, that shortgrass prairie country where we're talking about, there's not an expectation of a lot of forage growth up until now. Folks had made their plans to get through the winter and get to this point. The next 4 to 6 weeks, I think, is very critical in that country. That's when we expect to see forage growth take off. And, right now, the latest drought monitor shows that in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, there's 53.5 million acres in the D3 D3 and D4 with the two worst drought categories. And, with warmer weather coming on, that drought area could expand very rapidly in the next few weeks if we don't get some additional moisture. So we could be looking at the potential to impact quite a large number of animals as we get, probably not so much in May, but as we get through May and into June and beyond if it continues dry.
If it continues so dry, then it's almost assured that we'll see some level of cow herd liquidation moving into the market. But that's obviously hard to gauge in advance. But how much of a disruptive factor could that be in the normal flow of things?
Well, it is always hard to tell. As long as there's good conditions around a drought area, there's, some of those cattle that have to be removed from the drought area may simply relocate to other areas. There will be some culling. And as we get into June and July, spring calving cows will actually have calves big enough to be early weaned with a little bit of additional management, and that could precipitate more culling, more early culling than we normally see. So we could see some regional market impacts on cow markets and maybe even feeder markets, but I think mostly cow markets. I don't really anticipate that to be really widespread or something that you can detect that much nationally, but it certainly could be an issue in the region. And again, we don't know how big that region might get in the next 4 to 6 weeks.
And you mentioned the impact on the feeder side might be a little less pronounced, but there may be some stockers coming off early as well, although again, this is hard to tell ahead of the game.
That's right. I mean, as we went through the winter, of course, winter wheat stockers came off early because of the drought. There may be some early placed summer stockers that may not be able to sustain as we go forward. And again, we may have some of these early weaned calves actually showing up in the market a little earlier than usual this year.
We shall see and hope for rain to relieve all of these possibilities. And by the way, for our listeners, we will be talking with K-State's Sandy Johnson a little later on here in the broadcast on putting together a drought management plan in response to these potential conditions. Derrell, you also have some numbers that you and others have put together on the wildfire damage in your state of Oklahoma, and we do know and are aware of the seriousness of those wildfires that took place in the Woodward area and other places as well. Give us an idea of just what kind of loss estimates incurred there.
Well, of course, these are preliminary. We don't have firm numbers yet, but I put together some estimates last week that totaled up to, and this is on a burn that covered more than 348,000 acres. And I've got total losses estimated right now at $26.4 million. It's a pretty big number. It includes a lot of fence damage on, potentially more than 2,000 miles of fence. We are currently estimating that around 1,600 cattle died in the fire, and additionally there were quite a lot of burned and hurt animals that have to be cared for. Obviously, the loss of pasture and hay results in emergency feed needs for cattle that are displaced by the fire. And then, facilities and other things add to that total. So altogether, it comes up to be bigger than $26 million.
That is a devastating number, no other way to describe it. Do you have any word from the countryside as to how producers are faring in the aftermath? Is the recovery phase underway?
It certainly is underway, and I should add that those estimates that I did not include the fact that a number of houses and other personal property were destroyed in the fires as well, and I made no attempt to include those. My estimates were focused specifically on cattle-related industry things, but there is recovery going on. There is a great need for hay still in the area, and my understanding is that hay supplies are very tight, and that's been maybe one of the limiting factors. I think folks have gotten hay up until now, but they're going to need some more here for a while to come, given that the country still is in a drought and there's little prospects for a lot of forage growth right away. So that's a continuing need, and then obviously longer term there'll be a tremendous amount of fence and facilities that have to be rebuilt and repaired as a result of this.
Well, we would remind folks that there are several avenues by which they can look into providing aid to cattle producers in the Oklahoma area, as well as those in Kansas, likewise, that have suffered from wildfires. So seek those out. They're very easy to track down. Derrell, quickly here, you said that either the cash market will come down or the futures market will come up. As we look ahead and narrowing it down to this week, how do you see the markets faring?
For the time being, I see no reason why we won't continue to see, the current market strength persist. Again, there is a certain seasonal pressure here that's going to build over the next few weeks from a supply standpoint. But that said, I think in the short run here, demand has been and appears to still be very strong. So for the time being, I expect to hold relatively close to these current cash market levels. Again, as we work over the next few weeks, then we have to kind of see where that tug of war goes with supply versus demand. But in the short run, demand is doing well, and markets have been awfully resilient up to this point.
And we'll close on that positive note. Derrell, thanks for the comments. As always, we do appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
He is Derrell Peel, livestock economist, Oklahoma State University. And that's our cattle market segment for you for this week on Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. We're glad to have you back on this Agriculture Today. Thoughts for you grassland managers now as we are entering the summer grazing season. It's still quite dry over a large segment of Kansas, and our guest is going to endorse the idea of you grassland managers putting together a drought management plan, a contingency for if these conditions remain for a time. Sandy Johnson is with us. She is a beef cattle specialist for K-State Research and Extension based in Colby, Northwest Kansas. She just put an article out on this in the recent Beef Tips newsletter out of K-State. So, Sandy, this is a management approach that's been around a while, but it's your thinking that it does have value, particularly in these times.
Yes, if we had kids in school, we want them to go through a fire drill and be ready in case fire actually comes. So we know what we're going to do, and some of the panic of the situation doesn't prevent us from doing the right thing. And I think we can apply that analogy to some of the challenges we face when we get dry or drouthy conditions. And producers are optimistic or they wouldn't be in this business, and so we're always looking for that next rain. We know we're one day closer to it, but the problem can be is if we don't have a solid plan in place, then we're kind of waiting and not taking timely action. And really having a plan outlined on paper that indicates certain dates and what we might do, you just get to be in that waiting stage. And if we can outline it and think about it before we're really stressed with things look bleak, let's plan it and have that as a normal part of our management, because ideally this drought plan, we would continue to put information into it and refine it over a series of years. And we know in at least western Kansas, probably 1 of every 5 years is going to be in a drought category. And so that just needs to be part of our routine management. And, I think many producers have a lot of these things in their head, and they kind of know what they're going to do, sort of. But I think we can always benefit from being intentional about certain times and following the amount of rainfall we have, knowing how much forage is there. And that's a key component of a drought management plan is, knowing things like when is, say, 50% of the forage produced typically on my rangelands? What date is that? For many it might be middle of June. It really depends where you are in the state, but, when does that occur? And then as you look at, the amount of forage that you have produced and what you're expecting, you need to adjust your stocking rates based on what's happening. And the challenge is knowing, how much, and we have some examples of those types of adjustments that producers might consider, the amount of rainfall you receive and the type of pasture you have. If it's a mixed shortgrass or shortgrass, that might all influence the timing and degree of some of those decisions. But the point is we have a written plan.
Determining the growth that you have out there or are likely to have moving forward, do you go back on what you remember from years past, or is there another way of determining that?
Well, the best information would be from measurements that you had yourself of the amount of forage that is grown. We do have some estimates of that from larger databases. And, for example, one of the things, there's an excellent resource. We're familiar with the Drought Monitor that's on the UNL website. In association with that drought website is a segment on drought risk and planning, and it has some indications of roughly how much forage might be produced per inch of precipitation, and information about, and whether it's here or at other sites, estimates of when that forage production occurs generally, and kind of looking at that graphically over the growing season. But again, your best information on that is your own measurements of forage availability, but we can find other estimates to help you develop that plan. And this should be considered a living document that you would tweak over time as conditions warrant and what you learn about the response to your rangeland.
And coupled with that, then, the degree to which one would destock their pastures as dry weather would persist and pasture growth would be stymied to whatever degree. Once more, what are some standards to go by there?
Right. Well, the thing we want to keep in mind when we are planning how to stock a pasture, we need to think about it on a body weight basis. Our cow weight has changed considerably over the last 30 years, and we certainly wouldn't want to be basing our stocking rates on a 1,000-pound cow when they're 1,350 pounds. Mm-hmm. And so we need to think about it on a pounds of animal basis, and we know roughly how many pounds per day those animals will eat based on their body weight. And so depending on where you're at and whether your pasture is producing 2,500 pounds forage per year or 3,500 pounds per year, we might have a slightly different proportion. Now, maybe to get at a better example here, in our beef tips from May of 2011, then I would reference you an excellent example of an adaptation plan kind of for the central portion of the state that one of the NRCS people provided for us. And so, for example, one of the key dates in that plan was starting with April 1st and looking at what that past precipitation was from November to April. And if it was less than 4 inches, then there was an initial plan to reduce stocking rate by about 10% on a body weight basis. Then if by June 15th they were from 60 to 80% of the historical precipitation through the growing season through that June 15th point, then they might decrease another 30% in the next couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. And so on. If that rainfall was even less, then that destocking would go up. And so that's an example of a type of plan. And so one of the things that we should think about as we have set up our management systems, if we have maximized our stocking rate with strictly cow-calf pairs, and that genetic base is really important, and we don't really want to sell any cows, we have lost some flexibility in managing for this 1 in 5 years drought, really. And I don't know if I have hard data on when people might have had a bigger mix of yearling cattle and cow-calf pairs, but indeed having that type of mix makes the stockers, to me, much more marketable than your cow-calf pairs. And so can we build some flexibility into our system? And maybe for some people, those more marketable yearlings or part of the herd that we might need to destock might be replacement heifers.
The point is that one can customize this and should customize this to fit their situation and the flexibility that they have in destocking or swapping out animals, if you will, within that grazing season.
Right, and have the information you need to really prioritize. Maybe it's the genetics in the cow herd or the value of various classes of animals and how you might best optimize return if you do need to destock.
Any other quick components that need to be factored in here, Sandy?
Well, don't consider this just a sit down in 20 minutes type of process, and certainly there are people that can help provide some resources for you. Again, I would target some of these examples that are either in this May 2011 Beef Tips or from the Drought Mitigation Center at UNL. Also, that is linked in our current Beef Tips newsletter for kind of some examples. And in those examples, you'll see some are more specific than others, but I think you can also see the more specific ones would really help you take action as it needs to happen.
As Sandy noted, there is an article in the most recent Beef Tips newsletter from K-State and the Animal Sciences and Industry Department that addresses this in general and has a couple of links to follow to find out more resources and some examples of how you might put together your drought management plan for your grazing program heading into the summer months very soon now. That is at asi.ksu.edu. Sandy, we appreciate this. Thank you for the quick look at this topic.
Glad to be here.
Sandy Johnson with us, beef cattle specialist, K-State Research and Extension. Sandy is located in northwest Kansas for K-State. Agriculture Today will be back in a few moments. You're listening to the K-State Radio Network.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
Listening to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. I'm Jeff Wickman. The National 4-H Council's Raise Your Hand campaign gives alumni and friends of 4-H the opportunity to show their support by casting a vote for their state. The top 3 vote-getting states all receive cash awards. Southwest Area 4-H Youth Development Specialist Amy Sollock says that raising a hand for Kansas gets them one step closer to winning one of those awards, which will be used to help grow local 4-H programs. Amy, one of the major campaigns right now is the Raise Your Hand campaign, and this is one of those things where we're asking people to go online and do some voting for 4-H.
Yeah, it's kind of a virtual raise of the hand, a digital hand raise, if you will. And this is the second time National 4-H Council has initiated a nationwide campaign to kind of reach out and identify alumni and 4-H supporters across the state. And the first time around, we were just shy of the money. We came in 4th place. And so we're really determined to at least get up into those one of the top 3 spots so that we can win some money to enhance our programs here in Kansas. And something a little bit different this time around than the first campaign is that you don't have to be a 4-H alumni for your vote to count. So this campaign, we're actually seeking friends of 4-H, supporters, businesses that see the value in what we're doing and what we're all about in 4-H youth development. And so anybody can raise their hand, and that'll help us win some of those monies.
And that's an important change because 4-H does expand beyond the alumni. It is a community effort.
Absolutely. One of the cornerstone pieces to the 4-H program is that piece of civic engagement. And so early on, we try to teach children the importance of what it means to be a community member, how to become involved, even up through the legislative process. We understand that it's really important to give back to the communities. And it takes a village, obviously, to teach the children those types of life skills. And so 4-H relies heavily upon its volunteers, but more so even as those key community partners and businesses that help the programs thrive at that local level.
This campaign also gives you a chance to raise awareness of what 4-H does.
Absolutely. We do a great job of promoting the 4-H program to our own, right? So we have a lot of legacy families, generations of grandparents, parents, children, and their children. They're all in 4-H. But sometimes, it's not a great thing to be the best kept secret. And so we want everybody to know what fantastic things we're doing in terms of science, engaging our kids in STEM-related activities. Like I mentioned earlier, teaching children what it means to be a community member. What are good ways to stay physically healthy, ways to give back to the communities in terms of service. And so through this campaign, we have an opportunity to teach all of our friends and neighbors that maybe weren't 4-Hers themselves what we're all about.
Tell a little bit about how this whole process works. How do people go online and raise their hand?
The website is pretty simple. It's 4h.org/raiseyourhand. It takes all of 60 seconds, really, to submit your name and choose your state that you want to vote for. And obviously, we want you to vote for Kansas in this case. And that's it. There's no money involved. It's very easy. It's very quick. It'll take just a moment of your time. And then after you vote for Kansas or raise your hand per se, we would really appreciate it if you would share that link either on social media or in a text message, through an email with your coworkers, your neighbors, your friends, so that they too can raise their hand.
That's kind of the new aspect of this, isn't it? It used to be a lot of things about 4-H were community or mouth-to-mouth, and now we have a way to connect through social media.
Yeah, social media has really been a game changer in terms of the way we communicate. And so many of our kids are obviously on social media, but a lot of the parents and volunteers are as well. So if you do have a Facebook account, make sure you like and follow Kansas 4-H Facebook page, and you'll see many of our posts related to the Raise Your Hand campaign with the link embedded in there. You can click on it and vote that way. And then obviously if you can share those posts and tag your friends, even Instagram, Twitter, it's all very helpful.
Well, then this is great because if grandma and grandpa or aunt and uncle are in another state, they can still go on and support somebody who's in the Kansas 4-H program.
Absolutely. Yeah. I should mention we do have a paper form. So if you don't have Internet access, if you're working with an audience or a group that aren't quite Internet savvy, visit your local K-State Research and Extension office, and they can provide you with the paper form. Then they can turn around and get online and enter your information for them. So there is that option as well. And
this will continue through May 15th?
That's right. It's a 6-week campaign, and we've been a little bit all over the board. We started out in 8th place after week 1. Then we jumped to 3rd place, right behind Nebraska and Ohio. And then it sort of tailed off a bit. We dropped back down to 5th place. We obviously don't have the population numbers that some of the other larger states, but I feel like we can be competitive right up with the best of them. So we're really going to push it hard these next 2 weeks and see if we can't get back in some of those money spots. We have a lot of work to do if we're going to catch up with Ohio or Nebraska, but I think we can do it.
Well, and this is interesting because it does give you a chance to talk about all of the things that 4-H does for youth.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's so many things that could be said for the 4-H program. One of the things is, as a new parent myself, the fact that this is a family organization and this is something that every child in the family can get something out of, as well as the parents. It's not a drop your child off. It creates the space and the time and the opportunity to work together and learn as a family. Of course, we have over 30-some project areas, so there's an interest for every child. You could have one child very interested in the arts and those creative aspects, but you could have another child that's very interested in the sciences. But there's something for everybody. And then obviously we want them to learn those major life skills, such as leadership, civic engagement, healthy lifestyles, social skills. The list goes on and on. So we obviously know that we provide kids with those life skills. It's more of a matter of fact of making sure everybody else knows that that's what we're all about.
That's Southwest Area 4-H Youth Development Specialist Amy Sollock. Again, to vote for Kansas and give more youth the chance to experience 4-H in Kansas, visit 4h.org/raiseyourhand. Or you can get a paper form from your local extension office. The voting ends on May 15th. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. Thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.